Like many countries, Japan has historically utilized rivers for domestic use, industry, agriculture, and transport. As a result, cities developed along rivers, with the largest cities located around the mouth of rivers. Located in the Asian monsoon region, annual rainfall in Japan totals about 1,700 millimeters. This is about twice the global average. Rainfall increases from June to October due to the rainy season and typhoons. In addition to the steep, mountainous topography, the climate makes Japan prone to floods. With economic growth, significant urbanization took place in Japan. Japan is a small mountainous country, and the population is concentrated on the plains, which account for less than 30% of the country. These images illustrate the urbanization of Tokyo, Japan's capital. Japan's three major metropolitan areas are below mean sea level at high tide. About 50% of the population and 75% of its assets are concentrated in areas prone to flooding and inundation. Cities developed even in areas with a high risk of floods. Rivers in Japan are quite steep, and their distances from headwaters to mouth are short. Once rain falls, water levels can rise suddenly and reach flood levels in a short time. During flooding, the flow rate of the Tone River, which has the largest river basin in Japan, can be as high as 100 times the normal rate. This compares to 4 times the normal rate for the Danube and 3 times normal for the Mississippi River. Japan's rivers tend to see sudden, massive flooding that spreads downstream. The greater need to pursue flood risk reduction measures emerged while struggling to ensure sustainable urban development in river basins. Japan therefore began integrated river management. The government established a law that identified where responsibilities lay, with river administrators in charge of daily maintenance, flood management control, water utilization, and the environment. Typhoon Vera, which killed more than 5,000 people in 1959, was a wake-up call for Japan. As a result of investment in disaster risk reduction, the number of flood-related deaths successfully declined to 1/100th of that in the 50 years since. The risk reduction measures also supported economic growth. Rivers have flooding characteristics that depend on topography and climate. To ensure efficient and effective management, river development plans must be formulated in accordance with the characteristics of a river. River development plans consist of flood control, water utilization, and river environment conservation plans. Let's take a look at the process of formulating a flood control plan. This is the flow of flood control plan formulation. A flood control plan estimates how much rain falling in a catchment area will flow into rivers. It considers how to control the flow to ensure safety. In Japan, the target of the plan is based on such matters as the basin's population and assets, the priority of the river, and its disaster history. A river's flow rate and water level differ according to topography, the size of the catchment area, and the amount, intensity, and duration of rainfall. The runoff of rainfall to the rivers is assessed according to river discharge capacity and land utilization of the catchment area. surveyed data, such as past rainfall, convert rainfall in the catchment area into a river flow rate with a runoff model, using data such as past rainfall, river water levels, and flood watermarks. The repeatability of a model is important when forecasting flow rates. The accumulation of past data and its reliability play a crucial role in creating a good model. This is a graph created using a runoff model. Called a hydrograph, it shows time changes in flow rates from the start to end of rainfall. The hydrograph, used as the basis of a plan, is the basic flood. The maximum flow rate is the peak basic flood discharge. River administrators consider how to allocate the basic flood discharge between dams, flood control basins, and rivers to determine the design flood discharge, which becomes the target used in structural measures. The design flood discharge is used as a basis for developing river flood control measures, such as embankments and dredging. It is important that the plan takes a long-term perspective, giving consideration to future land utilization and facility maintenance. River management requires budgets and time. Japan undertakes staged works to enable efficient and effective management, formulating long-term river management basic policies and medium-term river improvement plans based on the basic policy. As of July 2018, river management basic policies had been formulated for all 109 government-managed river systems. Meanwhile, medium-term plans and river improvement plans have been formulated for 98% of river systems. The government allocates budgets and carries out management on the basis of a nationwide balance that comprehensively considers the progress of works, regional characteristics, and disaster tendencies. For example, Hokkaido's Ishikari River had frequently flooded and caused extensive damage. A progression of step-by-step flood control measures achieved significant decreases in damage, even when met with a typhoon of the same scale as that of some 50 years ago. It is vital to make pre-investments in risk reduction before an actual disaster occurs. This reduces the cost of damage by several times the cost of that investment. Flood control measures cannot be achieved overnight. That is why it is critical that the importance of measures is fully recognized, appropriate steps are taken, and steady implementation is carried out. The first step is to develop a data-based plan. It is the most important step for moving forward with flood control measures. Flood control measures create the infrastructure that become a foundation of economic growth. That's why advance investment to mitigate disasters are best, instead of panicking after a disaster occurs. There have been some very serious disasters in recent years. We have to start thinking about how to deal with them, or the measures taken may stop working. Even if a country takes measures to mitigate risks, natural disasters that exceed the designed size can strike sooner or later. We cannot stop natural phenomena, such as earthquakes and typhoons, from occurring. However, we can reduce risks or mitigate damage by strengthening our capacity to deal with them. JICA provides assistance to enhance risk management capabilities in each stage of the disaster management cycle, that is, prevention and mitigation, preparedness, emergency response, and rehabilitation and recovery. In extensive disasters, all ministries are mobilized for response activities. Infrastructure restoration is mainly handled by the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism, or MLIT, with local governments. MLIT has local branch offices across Japan. The Kanto Regional Development Bureau is one such office. It administers 104 rivers and 8 rivers systems in Tokyo and 8 neighboring prefectures. Its field offices on site oversee construction and management of the rivers. To learn how Japan responds to disasters, let's look at the case of the September 2015 torrential rains. Historic rainfall fell at this time in the Kanto and Tohoku regions. It flooded 61 rivers. The rain increased river flow and caused damage, such as embankment collapse at 19 rivers. One of them was the Kinugawa River. The source of the Kinugawa River is a marsh located 2,040 meters above sea level. The river flows into the Tone River. About 177 kilometers long, the Kinugawa River basin is 1,761 square kilometers. It is a Class A river managed by the Shimodate River Office, which is a field office. Efforts to control flooding of the Kinugawa River dates back more than 100 years to 1900. The government formulated the master plan of the Tone River, which also included the flood management plans of the Kinugawa River. Based on this plan, the central government built 3 dams in upstream Kinugawa River. It also carried out a series of river improvement works. The plan was later revised to increase flood control capacity. Construction of the 4th dam started in 1980 and was completed in 2012. The Kanto-Tohoku torrential rains of September 2015 occurred between September 9 and 11. Due to a series of typhoons, a linear rain band formed, causing extreme downpour in a single belt-like zone. September 8th, 3 p.m. The MLIT Regional Office set up the Regional Emergency Operations Center based on predetermined procedures. The mode was in watch status in preparation of a looming disaster. The next day, 1:30 p.m., the mode was upgraded to alert status. The same day at 10:54 p.m., the director of the field office called the mayor of Joso City. As a river administrating agency, MLIT provides information and forecasts on river water levels to local governments. In emergencies, MLIT provides information directly to local mayors to support their decision-making for evacuation orders. Based on the information provided, the mayor of Joso City set up emergency headquarters and commenced disaster response. September 10th, 12:20 a.m. A few hours later, the Japan Meteorological Agency issued an emergency heavy rain warning for upstream Kinugawa River. 7 hours later, the warning was expanded to include downstream areas. At 2:20 a.m., the mayor of Joso City issued evacuation orders to some areas of the city. 4:50 a.m., the regional office dispatched machinery such as drainage pump trucks and mobile lighting trucks to the area, placing them on standby. September 10th, 12:50 p.m. The embankment collapsed along the Kinogawa River in Joso City. The water level reached a record high of 8.06 meters. This was about 70 centimeters above the designed high water level. Kinogawa faced considerable damage, such as overflow and leakage at 30 locations, in addition to embankment collapse along the Kinogawa River. MLIT immediately set up headquarters for emergency operation. The first meeting was held just 55 minutes after the collapse, with the minister issuing instructions to hasten confirmation of damage and the achievement of early recovery. Within 9 hours after the collapse, the regional office immediately initiated emergency recovery works. Prompt recovery was critical, not only to prepare against the next rainfall, but also to enable evacuees to return home as soon as possible. We spoke with the person who directed the works as head of the construction site. The difference between normal and emergency recovery works is whether you have designs and drawings. We usually spend a lot of time and budget to prepare those drawings, but there were none for our emergency work. Recovery works commenced using hand-drawn sketches created based on experience. A temporary embankment was first built, followed by reinforcement work to prevent water infiltration. The work started about 9 hours after the collapse and continued around the clock. A 200-meter-long temporary embankment was completed in just 6 days. Reinforcement work was then undertaken using concrete revetment blocks and steel sheet piles. All emergency recovery work was completed in just 14 days. There was no time for lengthy discussions. We had to make fast decisions. In that sense, you could say that it was a challenging but worthwhile task for a civil engineer. A major factor that enabled immediate recovery was the speed of the initial response. MLIT had exchanged an agreement with the Federation of Construction Contractors in advance to conduct first response exercises. Based on the agreement, 48 companies responded to the call. The existence of stations to store flood-fighting materials also played a significant role. These stations contain emergency materials for use in disasters, such as sand, concrete blocks, and steel piles. 3 neighboring stations supplied materials for restoration work for this flood. MLIT has 136 such storage stations all over the country. With cranes and other equipment very crowded together, avoiding accidents was critical for maintaining speed. All work would have stopped if any had come into contact. Everyone kept up their concentration. This was how we completed all works ahead of schedule. The evacuation order and evacuation advisory were lifted when the government completed the works. What are the most important aspects of such on-site recovery? One is having a positive, proactive focus on speed. That's important because if you try to consider all the details, you end up just wasting time. At first, we create a rough overall outline. It doesn't matter if you end up with some extra machinery, people, or materials. It's important that you don't run out of things or people partway through and have to make additional arrangements. About 2,400 members of MLIT's Technical Emergency Control Force, or TEC-FORCE, immediately gathered from all over Japan. The TEC-FORCE, established in 2008, consists of MLIT employees. If a large-scale natural disaster occurs, or there is such risk, the TEC-FORCE determines the extent of damage, prevents expansion of damage, and enables the quick recovery of disaster-hit areas. There are about 9,700 MLIT employees registered nationwide as TEC-FORCE members, ready to be mobilized when a disaster occurs. The TEC-FORCE gathered at the regional office from across Japan. They undertook water drainage activities and surveys to confirm the damage situation. The head of the TEC-FORCE recalled the operation. We brought in staff from around the nation. I allocated the equipment, such as drainage pump vehicles, ensuring that there would be no duplication and that all worked together. My biggest task was to manage equipment and personnel to achieve maximum effect. The regional office also facilitated communication, sending information liaison officers to 23 municipal governments. They served as contact points to coordinate support needs in disaster-affected areas. It also carried out round-the-clock recovery work, liaising the construction site with MLIT headquarters and local governments. Everyone is excited and energetic at first because it's an emergency. But it's hard to keep it up for more than 2 weeks. The demarcation of tasks and an effective work shift system are needed to keep the work going until the end. Damage in Joso City included inundation of about 1/3 or 40 square kilometers of the city. Roughly 5,000 homes were fully or partially destroyed. Many residents did not evacuate in time and were stranded, and 4,300 people were rescued. This disaster demonstrated the critical role of dams in flood control. There are 4 dams in the upper reaches of the Kinagawa River. The local MLIT Integrated Dam Operation Office tried to hold as much water as possible upstream in Kinagawa River dams through a coordinated operation of the 4 dams. Around midnight on the 10th, when water levels exceeded flood risk levels downstream, the office made a major decision. Looking at the expected rainfall, we knew that Kawaji Dam would overflow in the next 3 to 4 hours, which would badly affect the people downstream. So we completely stopped releasing water from the dam upstream. This would reduce inflow to Kawaji Dam, thereby preserving its capacity. Ikari Dam also experienced its highest ever inflow, but flood control operations continued in coordination with upstream dams. About 100 million cubic meters were retained by the 4 dams in addition to the designed flood control volume. Post-disaster evaluation clarified that the 4 dams served a vital role in the mitigation of downstream flood damage in the following ways. They reduced the water level of the downstream Kinagawa River, reduced inundation downstream by 1/3, reduced the area inundated by 2/3, and halved the number of flooded houses. We monitor, maintain, and operate dams 24/7 while understanding downstream situations. Daily experience enabled our decisions. Phased development of structural measures gradually increased Japan's flood safety. However, these torrential rains saw about 4,300 stranded individuals requiring rescue. while the development of structural measures successfully increased safety levels, psychological dependency to structural measures delayed evacuation. To share the lessons learned from the Kinugawa River floods, the central government formulated the policy vision on rebuilding flood-conscious societies in December 2015. This initiative works as a fail-safe backup structural measure for the case that floods exceed design levels and spill over the infrastructures. For non-structural measures, it emphasizes a shift from government to community-led activities. This field office is working on the Kinugawa River Emergency Project to expedite river development construction works and to develop and disseminate flood risk reduction awareness. The central government, Ibaraki Prefecture, and the 7 municipalities in the downstream Kinugawa River basin carry out these integrated structural and non-structural measures. The idea is to bring together the government, prefectures, and municipalities. MLIT is mainly responsible for structural measures, and local governments take on non-structural measures. We hope to minimize flood damage through this kind of collaboration. For full-scale recovery, there is a special budget system in Japan to start recovery work immediately after a disaster. The Kinugawa River Emergency Project utilizes various budget systems and aims for completion in fiscal year 2020. The project targets not only areas with inundation, leakage, or collapsed embankments, but also the entire 44.3-kilometer stretch of downstream Kinugawa River. The project is raising or widening embankments on both sides as well as dredging the river. The total cost of these river improvement works will reach approximately $600 million. We created a 5-year action plan with a list of activities to prevent the recurrence of disasters. The biggest challenges were how to accelerate the speed of implementation and how to reduce costs. On May 27, 2016, 8 months after the Kanto Tohoku torrential rains and before the start of the flood season, work was completed at locations where embankments had collapsed. The Kanto Tohoku torrential rains caused floods that exceeded the standards of the time. Therefore, the new embankments were designed to ensure safety even in a similar rain event by raising the new embankments by 1.9 meters to 5.4 meters. The width of the levee crown was also widened to 6 meters from the original 3 to 4 meters. Non-structural measures aim to leave no person behind. Floods could exceed structural measures. That's why the leading role in non-structural measures has to be shifted to residents. Making the transition requires good communication, even while construction is still underway. One example is the My Timeline project. The field office has prepared teaching materials that are introduced in disaster risk reduction education in elementary and junior high schools. The aim of the project is to enable each resident to protect themselves from floods by creating their own evacuation timeline. Residents should know what to do at each stage, such as the approach of a typhoon, rise of river water levels, or the issuance of an evacuation advisory. We want children to be able to share their learning and experiences with the broader community. The My Timeline project has the participation of many residents and has grown significantly. After having experienced the Kanto Tohoku torrential rains, the citizens and government of Joso City recognize that disaster risk reduction is essential for our future. We have to undo our reputation as the flood-damaged Joso City. In other words, we may have experienced floods, but we now want to be known as a city that is proactively and innovatively reducing disaster risks. Our citizens have also started a variety of self-help and mutual help initiatives in their own districts. The local stakeholders are working very hard. As the River Management Authority, we must also keep up with their efforts. They say disasters strike when least expected, but a disaster will inevitably occur. That's the sort of attitude we need when working against disasters. The central government, local authorities, and individual residents are working to reduce disaster risks, preparing for the next disaster by leveraging their strengths and practicing Build Back Better will enable stronger regional development. JICA utilizes the expertise, experience, and technology of Japan to support flood control measures in developing countries. Let's now look at the example of JICA projects in the Philippines. Metropolitan Manila developed around the capital of the Philippines. The Mangahan floodway plays a critical role for flood control in densely populated metropolitan Manila. With JICA's assistance, the government of the Philippines started construction on this 8.5-kilometer floodway in 1980 and completed it in 1988. The Marikina River and Pasig River flow through metropolitan Manila, which has a population of some 13 million people. The Mangahan floodway diverts the Marikina River into Lake Laguna, thereby reducing the volume of water flowing to downstream Pasig River. This reduces the flood risk of the Pasig River. In 2009, the floodway showed maximum efficiency when Typhoon Ondoy, which caused damage that affected nearly 5 million people, struck metropolitan Manila. The floodway diverted the water from Marikina River to Lake Laguna at a rate of about 3,000 cubic meters per second. Around the Pasig River, flood damage was limited to certain districts, enabling a quick recovery. The Mangahan floodway is making a significant contribution in such ways toward mitigating flood damage in metropolitan Manila. JICA continues to provide assistance for flood control in the Philippines, such as river improvement works for the Pasig and Marikina rivers. This is Ormoc, a city on Leyte Island in the Philippines. Tropical storm Thelma struck in 1991, causing massive damage, with 8,000 people lost or missing. Between 1996 and 2001, JICA provided assistance for river embankment construction and other flood control projects. Local districts continue to operate and maintain these facilities. Even now, 20 years after project completion, they continue to reduce flood damage caused by typhoons.
JICA has been very instrumental in nation building as far as Philippine government is concerned. JICA or government of Japan, when they do some assistance, it covers almost from the start all the way to the completion. Their adaptability on the structures, on their design, the technology can really be best suited for Philippine geography. So Ormoc has become now a pilot of infrastructures for flood control funded by JICA. It becomes a model to all other urban cities and countryside development we have now. The build under this golden age of infrastructures was actually seen as a fastest way of boosting the economy on development, especially giving more importance on the infrastructure. So we saw the needs to have more investment on flood control because the requirement for addressing flooding may not only be focused on urban centers, but this time we need to go to the countryside area to address a more holistic program for the entire Philippines.
Flood control measures lead to improvement of the local living environment and economic growth. What does each country need to do when going forward with flood control efforts? I think that three things are critical: government leadership, budget allocation through such leadership, and the capacity to utilize that budget. In particular, capacity means collecting all types of historical data or designing and planning projects based on such data, then managing the projects, collecting the next set of data, feeding it back to the plan, and sequentially creating a positive cycle to improve the plans. These are the necessary processes. I hope that all developing countries will obtain this capacity and put it into practice. Through various international cooperation efforts, JICA will continue to provide assistance for disaster risk reduction capacity development in developing countries.